올라서다 도말 아주지 고마하게 러지
First of all, I'd like to wish all of the teachers at the various monasteries, the lamas, the tulkus, and the teachers, the students from the shadras, and particularly the nuns in the nunneries, and all of my Dharma friends, male and female, who are watching over webcam. I would like to wish you all my warm greetings. Now today, yesterday we were speaking about the topic of meat that is pure in the three ways, whether it is appropriate to eat meat or not. And I discussed the question of meat that is pure in the three ways yesterday. So I thought I should continue and finish the topic this morning, or today. You know, the Bhagavan Buddha taught his monastic students that their food shouldn't be too luxurious, that they should instead live of alms. And so he made rules that they should do this. Now, when you go for alms, there is also, when you go for alms, there's the danger that some faithful sponsors will kill animals for the sake of the Sangha, and so for that reason, he made the rule about the meat that is pure in the three ways, so that you do not eat meat that is killed specifically for yourself. Excuse me, I'm having a technical problem. And so because of that danger, then it is important that you eat the food that is pure, the meat that is pure in the three ways. So this is the rule that the Buddha made. And when he made this rule, then in Indian society at the time, the talk that happened was that people said that the Buddha had allowed his monastic students to eat meat. There was no real discussion in the society that the Buddha had allowed his students to eat meat. Not that they had allowed to eat meat that's pure in the three ways. They said that he had allowed his students to eat meat. And so because of this, at that time, those who particularly were attached to vegetarianism, such as the Jains and other non-Buddhists, began to criticize the Buddhists, primarily for the reason that they said that the Buddha allowed his monastic students to eat meat. Now, it wasn't just the non-Buddhists, even among the Buddhists' own students. There were people who disputed with him the idea that students were allowed to eat meat that is pure in the three ways. Now, the main person making this dispute was Devadatta. Now, if we talk about Devadatta's origins or his background story, Devadatta was the son of the Buddha's uncle Amritodana. Amritodana is the Buddha's uncle, Devadatta was the son. Now, there are other explanations in other sources, but in any case, he was a cousin of the Buddha. He was the son of the Buddha's uncle. And so the Devadatta first entered the community of Buddhist monastics and became a monk, but later had a discordant way of seeing things. and he felt competitive to the Buddha, and so he separated from the Sangha and established his own separate monastic community and philosophical school. Later, Devadatta in his own philosophical schools. And, later he perished, and some say that he was carried away in a flood. Some say that the ground split open and he fell into the house. But in any case, he passed away. Still, even after he died, his followers continued and upheld his tradition. And the way we know this is that in the 4th and 5th century, the Chinese monk Fa Xian went to India. And then in India, Tang Xuanzang went to China, or went to India. And during both of their times, the tradition of Dharmadatta's followers was still there. What they wrote in the notes of their travels, they wrote that Devadatta's tradition went for after the 3 Buddhas of the past. So this would be Kanaka Muni, Kashyapa, and so forth, but not to Shakyamuni. And so that tradition was still present up to the 8th century. Now, while the Buddha was still on this world, Devadatta caused what is called a schism in the wheel of the Sangha. Now, schism in the wheel of the Sangha means that the Buddha's monastics split into 2 factions. And he also drew blood from the Buddha's body with a malicious intention. This means that he was actually trying to murder the Buddha. He's thinking that he should kill or murder the Buddha, and did many different things to try to do this. And for that reason, he had accumulated the heinous acts. They're very strong acts. These are the worst acts, the karma of the heinous acts. It's similar to killing your father or killing your mother. And so for this reason, according to the scriptures, the foundation vehicle, it said that as soon as Devadatta died, he was reborn in hell. But according to the Mahayana Sutra and so forth, there's a prophecy that Devadatta will awaken to Buddhahood in the future. In some other Mahayana Sutras, it says that in order to show the Buddha's greatness, he took the form of a competitor of the Buddha's. And likewise, and also, he was just an emanation who came in order to demonstrate to sentient beings how they would be reborn in hell if they committed the heinous acts. So there's this explanation of Devadatta and all. But in any case, whether he was born in hell or later, or whatever happened to him, that's something that we don't know right now. It's difficult for us to know. However, but in any case, what Devadatta did actually was that he said that first, he said that they should keep 5 additional precepts, 5 additional austerities. He's made the suggestion to the Buddha. He suggested the 5 additional precepts of the 5 precepts. Now, these 5 precepts, one of these included not eating meat at all. He said that you shouldn't eat meat at all, and that those who follow him should not eat meat, and then basically keep these 5 austerities, or these 5 precepts. Now, he made this suggestion, but the Buddha did not accept it. And so for that reason, the Buddha's monastic students then turned into, it became 2 factions. Now, actually, the majority of them followed Devadatta. So a few stayed with the Buddha, but most of them followed Devadatta. Now, what are these 5 austerities? Now, there are different. When we ask what the 5 austerities were, there are different assertions about them in the Vinaya scriptures of the different schools. But today, instead of speaking about all of those, So these are described very clearly in the 50 verses in the Vinaya and so forth, in other texts, so in the Tibetan tradition, and in the great commentaries on the Vinaya. So if you read these, you will know, so I don't need to speak about them now. However, there are different ways that the 5 austerities are listed, but they're all the same in including vegetarianism. So if you look at it from one perspective then, during the time when the Buddha was on earth, what the Buddha said to his monastic followers is that they should not eat any meat at all, but they should only eat meat that was pure in the 3 ways. So this is the rule the Buddha made. But Devadatta said that meat shouldn't be eaten at all, and they should practice pure vegetarianism. And so that was his suggestion. Not only did he make the suggestion, he also made that very rule for the monastics who followed him. So for this reason, Bhaviveka's Toten Barwa, the blazing intellectual, said that, and later masters also said, if you're following the foundation vehicle, you must eat some meat, because if you do not, then if you do not accept meat, then you are then there's the danger that you'll be following become the austerities of Devadatta. And so for that reason, and so this is one of the main reasons cited by those who wanted to prove that monastics should be allowed to eat meat, or that they should eat it. The reason is that the Buddha said that we should eat meat that is pure in the 3 ways, because the Buddha taught we should do this. If we do not, and if we say that we're not going to eat meat at all, then this is like the action of Devadatta. It's like the austerity of Devadatta. So there are people who say this nowadays. Now, something I forgot to mention, that the text I forgot was a text by Amalamitra on the Vinaya. Now, there's something we need to examine here. If we look at the Great Exposition, I will show you the citation now. Now, where did it go? So this is the quotation from the Great Exposition. Now, the Great Exposition is one of the root texts of our philosophical schools. When we speak about the four different philosophical schools, there's the Great Exposition and the Sutra school, and the basic text of the Great Exposition school is this Great Exposition. Now, what it says is that it says, and I don't need to read all of these. So it basically says that, among the Buddha's disciples, Mahayana was the one who had the greatest contentment and the greatest trainment, and the one who was the most careful about food and the strongest in conduct was Bakula. Now, the difference between the two of these two is that Mahayana would eat whatever alms, no matter whether it was good or bad. He would not choose it. If it was good, he would eat it. If it was bad, he would eat it. But Bakula, when Bakula, when he received better foods, he would give up the bad food. But eat the worse foods. Now, so Mahakashyapa ate whatever was offered him, good or bad, and Bakula only ate the worst foods. And what is the worst for that? Now later, the great venerable masters of the Great Exposition described this in different ways. Now, some of the people said that the reason why Mahakashyapa didn't eat the better foods or Bakula didn't eat the better foods is that the better food would include foods such as meat, the more elaborate preparations, the more luxurious preparation that would include meat. And if you have meat, then this would include a lot of meat. You have to cut sentient beings' throats and cut their meat off. And so that food would be made from the flesh and blood of many animals. And so from compassion, he wouldn't eat these better alms offerings. Now, some people say that if he ate the better food, that he would have many faults that appeared to him, so he didn't eat these better foods. So now there's a question here, and the question is, if Bakula gave up the better foods and only ate the worse, then when he was going on alms, did he just not accept the better foods, or did he accept them and then throw them out later? And so the question is, if he didn't take it at first, then that wouldn't be out, because the Buddha said that when you may not make choices when you go on the alms round. Because people going on alms round don't have the power to choose whether they're going to the better or the worse food. Now, once you have accepted the food, if you throw it away, then there is the danger of wasting the offering that the donor gave you. You're wasting that offering. And so, what did Bakula do? If he only ate the worse alms and not the better, then how is it that he did it? Did he not accept it at first, or did he throw it away after he got it? It was that he first didn't accept it all. But when you say he didn't accept it at first, so then doesn't he have the fault of making a choice when he's going on the alms round? He does not have that fault, and that reason is that Bakula had the divine eye. He had clairvoyance. Because he had clairvoyance, when he went on the alms round, he would look with his clairvoyance and to see who had the worst alms. And when he knew who had the worst alms, he would go to them and ask for the alms. He wouldn't go to places where they were offering the better alms. And so for that reason, he didn't have that fault. And so for that reason, the elder Bakula only ate the worse alms, not the better alms, such as meat. Likewise, it also says in the Angulimala Sutra, it says that Mahakashyapa dwelled within the 12 qualities of training, and also had a pure vegetarian practice. So he also did not eat meat. And so when we look at these different quotes, what we can understand is that during the time of the Buddha, there were also many monastic students who did not eat meat and who ate vegetarian. We can also use our logic and see that the monastics from Brahmin families had for generations not meat, and so they were used to it. And so for them, it's like they were unable to eat meat. It's quite possible that there are people like that we can guess or infer. And so for those who would eat, and it was and I think that the Buddha did not make a rule that the people who were uncomfortable eating meat had to eat meat. So when you think about, so I think we can see from this that merely because of not eating meat that is pure in the three ways, or not eating meat at all, does not necessarily mean that one is in Devadatta's camp. Now, what is the reason why saying that that not eating meat was pure in the three ways Devadatta's position? Was he made this rule not primarily because of conduct, but because of his motivation. Now, the reason that we say that it's because of his motivation is that, as I said before, Devadatta was a relative of the Buddha, and he thought to himself he was the same. He thought he had pride of thinking he was the same. And he was also really competitive towards the Buddha. And because he was so competitive to the Buddha, for this reason, when the Buddha he disputed the Buddha's rules of the Buddha eating the meat that's pure in the three ways, and he had thought that he should make an even stricter rule than that. And so he made this out of these strict rules out of his pride and out of his competitiveness. Did he make these rules out of compassion for animals? It's difficult to say that. It's primarily out of his competitiveness for the Buddha. And he said the Buddha said that the Buddha is allowing you to eat meat, but I'm not going to allow you to harm sentient beings. If I make a rule like that, then that's a better rule. That's a better in the society. It'll look better. People will consider that better. And so for that reason, he made that rule. And people would see it in this way, he thought. So Devadatta's motivation for giving up meat was mistaken. It was competitiveness towards the Buddha. It was in order to bring the Buddha down. That is why he made that rule. It is not a rule that he made out of a pure motivation and compassion. I think it's fair to explain it like this. Now, basically, when we think about the original Buddhism, and then during the time when the 18 schools spread, then overall in Buddha, this is the primarily time when the most Buddhists said that you should eat meat that is pure in the three ways. Then later, the Mahayana Dharma spread in India, and from the time that it began to spread, and especially the time that the sutras such as the Great Parinirvana Sutra, the Travels to Lanka Sutra, the Sutra of Benefiting Angulimala, the Noble Cloud of Jewels Sutra, the Elephant Strength Sutra, and the Great Kucha Sutra, and in particular the Essence Sutras, the sutras that teach the Buddha nature, teach that even eating meat that is pure in the three ways is inappropriate, and so this teaching became even more prevalent. And so basically the teachings of practicing vegetarian and giving up meat became very, very strong and very prevalent. And so for that reason, most of the Mahayana Sutras that prohibit meat are predominantly sutras of the third turning wheel of the Dharma, or what we call essence sutras, sutras that teach the Buddha nature. Now, there are many reasons why they say so. Of course, there are many different reasons, but the main reason, if we think about it, as in the Mahayana, it is said that we should think of all sentient beings as if they were our parents. And if you really think from your heart that your father and mother, now this is not just sort of, mouthing, but if you really feel it from your heart. So from the depths of your heart, if you think from your mind that they are your father and your mother, it would be really hard to say that you're able to eat their flesh. Likewise, if we were to eat sentient beings' flesh, then this would corrupt our minds, or it would stain our minds. our minds would become more hardened, and eventually would become less loving kindness and compassion. It become very stiff or a hard person, being. And so this is a difficult issue, a difficult problem, serious issue that we should avoid. In particular, in the Essence Sutras, it is taught that all sentient beings have Buddha nature. And I think that for this reason, because this is taught, it's taught that it is taught that one shouldn't eat the flesh of a being who has Buddha nature. But here today, if I don't need to read each of the citations from the Mahayana Sutras. Now, if you wish to read them yourself, you can read the sutras, the Great Mahaparivarana Sutra, the Travels Alanga Sutra, the Sutra of Benefiting Angulimala, and so forth. I don't need to read them all now. In particular, in Chinese, there is a sutra called not eating flesh out of the omniscient sage not eating meat out of compassion. Means that during the time of Maitreya, then out of compassion, you will primarily emphasize compassion, and so for that reason, if you in that time, during the time of Maitreya, if the monastics eat meat, they will incur defeat and lose their vows. So this is a prophecy that the Buddha made, it is said. Now, I think there's something really important to understand here, because if you think about it from one perspective, in the Mahayana, most of the sutras that prohibit eating meat are in the last sutra, turning of the wheel of Dharma. And Maitreya is the one who teaches the Buddha nature, or in Tibetan we'd say the Shentong. But I think if we talk about, I think it's better to say one who teaches the Buddha nature, because it's better. Because you say, then when you say Shentong and Rantong, then you're creating dispute. When you say people who are teaching Buddha nature, I think there's less room for dispute. So frankly, those the proponents of Buddha nature is the one who wrote the one who wrote the treatises that teach the taught the Buddha nature most clearly, and particularly the Ratnagota Vibhaga, or the Sublime Continuum. And so for these reasons, I think they're a good reason for why they're saying this. And so I thought I should explain these reasons to you today. Now, if we look at the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, what it says is, the rule allowing meat that is pure in the three ways was actually made in order to prohibit meats in stages. Prohibit meat in stages, not instead of doing it immediately. So it was not a rule that is saying that one should eat meat. And it said that after that it passed into nirvana, that even eating meat that was pure in the three ways. Now, when we look at this, whether actually there are people who practiced this or not, in historical fact, I don't know. It's difficult to say that. However, among the Foundation Day schools that we have today, that if we say to them that the Great Parinirvana Sutra said this, and that and we recited this citation saying that you shouldn't that you shouldn't eat meat after the Buddha passed into nirvana, they wouldn't accept it. And the reason they wouldn't accept it is because it's a Mahayana Sutra. And since they don't accept the Mahayana Sutra, so they would not accept the citation. And so for this reason, Gawa Gendudrup wrote in his had question and answer with Chanda Namga Jatsang, who was a king actually in Tibet. He was actually very learned in astrology, the astrology of Kala Chakra in particular. It's said that he was an emanation of the Richtin king Pema Karpo, or White Lotus. And so they had so Gendun Drup had recorded his question and answers with him. And what they record is that in the Mahaparinirbhana Sutra, that the monastics would not be allowed to eat meat after the Buddha's passage into nirvana was said was primarily intended for Mahayana monastics. Now, at that time, one doubt we might have that is at this time, in the Mahayana, it says that meat is prohibited out of compassion. And so if we think about this, then some people might think, people say, if you're going to make a cup of rice, there's also going to be wrong to eating a cup of rice, because in order to create a cup of rice, when you are farming it, you kill a lot of insects, and you kill many insects in order to raise it, and so it harms sentient beings. And so for that reason, you wouldn't even be able to eat meat, they say. So there are many people who say this also. Now, this doubt, this is not a new doubt, actually. This sutra also appears in the sutras of the Buddha. For example, what it says in the Angulimala Sutra. That's what it says. Manjushri expanded. So it's not allowed to plow fields. No, I don't need to read it all, but there are many different things. Many people say that you are not allowed to eat meat because it harms sentient beings. So then the Manjushri asked the Buddha, well then, if that is so, then you shouldn't be allowed to plow either, right? And you shouldn't be able to make use water to make food because it would harm sentient beings. And at that time, the Buddha said this is a worldly way of thinking. Because if you are some of the lay preceptors, then the food and drink are something that lay people need to produce, and lay people need to engage in farming. And if there are no farmers to do, if there are no lay people to do farming, then there'd be no way that you could achieve Buddhahood. So in other words, if you're going to have Buddhas, you have to have people who are farming. There are living beings in the ground, the living being in the water, there's living being in the airs. And so if you have a really narrow way of thinking about that, no matter what you do, there would be no way that you wouldn't be committing misdeeds. And so there'd be no way we could be pure, and there'd be no way that you should ask about this in society. And in particular, the one thing we need to think about is that for the sake of meat, we're specifically killing sentient beings. When you're plowing, then the insects are killed on the side. It's not that they intentionally kill them. What you're intending to do is to plow the fields. Now, of course, as you do this, we'll also kill insects, but it's not what you're particularly intending to do. You're particularly intending to kill the. You're not intending to kill the animal. So you have to understand the difference between killing sentient beings and the fault of taking a sentient being's life. Even when we're walking back and forth or going to different places, we kill many insects. If you think about it in that way, then there'd be nothing at all that you'd be allowed to do. You wouldn't be able to do anything. And so for that reason, you'd just be thinking too narrowly. It doesn't really help you understand to decide the actual nature. It's just raising a doubt, but it's not actually, in fact, it's not something you can actually put into practice. Some of our doubts are actually just prevent people from moving forward. they don't show you any way that you can move, and move forward. And if they don't show you any way you can move forward, then I don't think there's any benefit to them. So in brief, in the Mahayana, they emphasize the practice of loving kindness and compassion for sentient beings. And in the Mahayana Sutras, eating meat is prohibited. And so for that reason, most of the monastics in countries where the Mahayana spread eventually became vegetarians and stopped eating meat. For example, if you think about it in terms of China, to give that gives the clearest example of this. Within China, the vegetarianism, practice of vegetarian began about 500 years after Buddhism had spread to China. Before that, monastics would be allowed to practice vegetarian at will. They didn't necessarily have to give up meat. But after that, there was a great movement to give up meat. And the person who's leading this movement was the Emperor Wu of Liang during the Southern Zhang dynasty. So he was in the 6th century. He was born in 502 and passed away in 549. He had very great faith in Buddhism. He was a great patron of Buddhism and had great faith in Buddhism. And he himself actually went forth as a monastic 3 times. He would go in. He would go forth, become a monastic, and wear the robes, and then people would come and say, "Oh, please come back and be our emperor." And then he'd do this over again. So he spent a lot of time reading the Buddhist scriptures. And when he was reading the Mahayana Sutras, he saw many of the statements that it is that out of love and compassion it is important not to eat meat. And so this influenced him greatly. And so for that reason, up to this time, there were in China there's temples to the ancestors, and those particularly for the for the emperors, and so he made a prohibition of the meat sacrifices in the ancestral temples. And likewise, there are also many medicines that were made out of animal products, and he made a rule that those medicines may not be made out of animal products. And so he provided a good example of pure example. And he also used the strict rules of the nation, and using the sutras, the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Travelsalanga Sutra, and the Angulimala Sutra, as a basis for creating for writing a letter talking about giving up meat. And so in this, I think he shared his opinion that monastics should not eat meat. Now, it's not just that he shared his opinions. He also specifically invited 198 male and female monastics to come to the palace and to discuss the issue of whether eating meat was appropriate. And so there's a great conference to discuss whether in the Mahayana it was appropriate to stop eating meat. And so because this happened at that time, he'd read so many he had prepared over 50 questions with his great intelligence, and he used these to ask the upholders of the Vinaya about to give answers to them. And so basically, when we say he emphasized the Mahayana Sutras that say that prohibit eating meat out of love and compassion, and so for that reason. This movement spread greatly throughout the country, and for that reason there was a great spread of the vegetarianism among the Chinese monastics. And these days in Tibet, there are some people who speak about this. And people who say there's no such tradition of this vegetarianism in Tibet. This is something that came from China, they say. It's an influence of Chinese Buddhism, they say. And likewise, even within Chinese Buddhism, giving up meat was an order of a Chinese emperor. But really, it's not actually such a simple issue. Because the emperor himself, the Chinese emperor himself, as I said before, didn't prohibit eating the meat because of being emperor. He said he said these sutras say this. He shared the quotations from the sutras, and when he said that, then when he showed that if we are Mahayana, then to say that's not so, then that's different. If you accept the Mahayana Sutras, it's difficult to say that it's not so. And so for that reason, that is something that we need to keep this in mind. Likewise in Tibet, the tradition of practicing vegetarianism is not something that is new. It's actually very clear that this has been practiced from the past. Generally in Tibet, because of the geography, it's difficult to give up meat. It's extremely difficult. And at such a high elevation in Tibet, since they had no technological advances, it was difficult to grow vegetables. Even if you planted them, they wouldn't grow. And so for this reason, from the old times, the practice of eating meat that was pure in the three ways was the primary practice. However, later, after many generations, after many years had passed, then the rules became relaxed, and people started eating whatever meat they could get their hands on. And in Tibet, monasteries would order sentient beings to be slaughtered for their meat. Or some monasteries also had butcheries, slaughterhouses. If we're practicing according to the Vinaya, then there are many situations that are contradictory to the Vinaya and were inappropriate. So for that reason, that was a main reason that many sentient beings, great beings, gave up prohibited eating meat, because many people were acting against it. These included people such as Dobos Shurap Gyaltsen, Ngordshin Kungan Sampo, Shapkar Tsodol Randrol, Nyalama Pema Dusan Shadza Tashi Gyaltsen, Udisam Pama Gansen, Kado Chodol Pema Kunzang, and also in later times, when we came to India, Chadra Sangye Dorje, the 14th Dalai Lama, and likewise the Khenpo Jigme Punsok in Tibet. So many great beings have made a lot of movement towards eating vegetarianism, particularly in the 21st century now. Most of the sutras, most of these monasteries in Tibet and outside have probably stopped serving meat in their communal kitchens. I haven't actually researched this, but my guess is that it is this. There are also many members of the Sangha who have given up meat. And there are also many vegetarian societies and vegetarian movements in Tibetan society. Now, of course, there are many people have different opinions here, but for both sides, so I think there are many issues that need to be researched on all the different angles of the issues. Particularly, some people say that because they're vegetarian, that because they eat vegetarian, then they criticize people who are eating meat and so forth, and disparaging and speaking badly about them. That's not good at all. Also, as there meat eaters who say various things about vegetarians, and I think that it's not good to speak badly about each other. And so, even though we're beginning to do something, but we end up getting into disputes, and I think that's not good. As I said before, Devadatta's movement of not wanting to, of giving up meat, was that in terms of the conduct was perhaps good, but because of his motivation, it became a non-dharmic action. For the similarly, when we practice vegetarianism, if our conduct is good but our motivation is not, then I think that actually there's a danger that our conduct and practice becomes similar to that of Devadatta. So it's really important that we be very careful about our motivations. So I think we will take a break here, and then when we come back, I will continue from here. Next, as I said before, vegetarianism is very difficult in Tibet to be a complete vegetarian because of the if you cannot do something that is possible in a country and a place, then there's a question. But in Tibet, it's difficult to be vegetarian. But still, there are many Tibetan scholars and meditation masters who talked about the benefits of vegetarian and the faults of eating meat, as I've said before. Now, among them, if we think about the Kagyu, think about many of the Kagyu forefathers gave examples of giving up meat and practicing vegetarian. There are innumerable ones. To give an example, we think among the three forefathers of the Kagyu lineage, Lord Milarepa, as is recorded in his collected works, when he was at Nyanang Belly Cave. Now, at that time, he was straight with Rinpoche, and Rinpoche was someone who just really didn't listen to what he was told. He didn't listen to what Milarepa said to him. And so it's often said that he was criticized 3 times by his guru for this. And in any case, at that time, Rinpoche had some thoughts of the 8 worldly concerns. And Milarepa said to him, you must give up these thoughts of the 8 worldly dharmas. No, Rinpoche thought, no, I've given up my homeland, so how can that have problems with the 8 worldly dharmas? And he said, well, in the Dharma texts, if you've given up your homeland, you've accomplished half of the Dharma, it says, right? Just giving up your homeland, you've practiced, you've done half of your Dharma practice, right? That's what it says, right? And Milarepa said that these are just words of the general Dharma, but it's actually not that much benefit, he said. So he gave many instructions on this, but it really didn't help Rinpoche that much. And not only did it not benefit him, then one time they went to Nyanang. So this is like a valley, right? In Nyanang, there was like a market there, and in that market there were many butchers who sold meat. And so one time when they came, Milarepa and Rinpoche went down to beg for alms, and to ask for food if you're not polite about it. So they're going there to beg for food, because they're primarily butchers. There are like stacks of flesh and piles of animal heads, and the flayed skins were trained about. There were lots of blood collecting all around. And likewise, there are many sentient beings who are about to be killed. There are many that had been killed, and those who were in a long line, they're waiting to be slaughtered. And in the center of it all, there was a butcher. And so there are many different ways that you can slaughter sheep. Sometimes you suffocate them, right? You put a muzzle around you suffocate them by muzzling them. Another way is to cut them and then cut their belly and reach in and cut their cardial arteries. And so he cut the sheep, and it was about before he could put his hand. You need to cut the suspension, and after he cut the stomach a little bit, once he made the wound, then he lost the sheep. And the sheep, normally the sheep are tied down, but I don't know what it is. He lost the sheep escaped, and the sheep's intestines, its stomach had been cut, and so the intestines ran around with its intestines dragging behind, and as bleeding out bleeds. And his sheep was shaking, and it came over to Jetsun Milarepa and his disciple for protection. And he came to Milarepa and died right there. And after the sheep died, then Milarepa is such great compassion that he cried and shed many tears. He had shed many tears and needed transference for the sheep immediately. And transferred the consciousness onto the bodhisattva path. And out of great compassion, he wrote a song. And I'm going to show you the song. And the reason for this is that, for me, this song was really helpful. I'm going to read it. Ema, sentient beings of samsara, look to the path of liberation. Alas, these here with such negativity, what a shame, ignorant of karma and this human birth with leisures, how definating is this killing of beings. How regrettable to have such self-delusion, how shameful indeed to kill one's parents. What's wrong to be done with this stack of killed flesh? What to be done with this pooling of blood, eating meat, however one hungry is, such confused perception, thinking anything, such negativity without any compassion, delusive ignorance that's obscured about everything. What can be done with such cultivation of misdeeds, giving torment however they please, such wickedness to those who act in this way? How shameful, oh, how such sadness and heartache. Oh, they're so busy with the negativity and all that they do. Later they won't remember a single moment. When I see such people, I feel for them. I think of those with such a negative conduct, and I am disturbed. Rechungpa, doesn't it make you think of the sublime Dharma? If it does, then give rise to sadness and dissolution. If you meditate, go to the mountain retreats. If you contemplate the Guru's kindness. If you escape something, escape from the root of non-virtue. If you let go of something, let go of mundane deeds. If you keep something, keep your promise to practice. If you understand, then bring your life to the Dharma. So what this is saying, this is that you should, what he's saying essentially is looking at the way these animals are being being slaughtered. Look at that with compassion. Look at how we're all fooling ourselves. All our parents, our sentient beings are dying, and what can we do? It's like we see, and there's nothing we can do about it. And we see these stacks of all the flesh, what are we going to do? We should have this feeling. And if you look at how much blood there is, well, it's like we don't have no idea what to do. When you look at the way people eat meat, you think, that's how hungry. It's like people are eating with no compunction at all. And so he's saying this song. And for me, this is a really helpful song. And so when he sang this song, then, Rechungpa also, Rechungpa had many instructions before, and they hadn't helped him before, but now he actually saw a sentient being, a sheep, with its intestines trailing behind it, dying. I felt some world weariness and a wish for liberation. And he said to the Lama, I said, now I'll really give up the eight dharmas and living off of wicked food, and I'll go stay in the mountains. So now where should we go? And so Milarepa said, well, we'll go to Lachi. Let's go to, if we're going to go, let's go to Lachi. Now, there are many people at the market, and they felt they gave many there many people felt faith, and they gave many offerings to Milarepa and his disciple, but it was mainly meat because it was at a butcher's market, and so they didn't accept the offerings, and they went to Lachi, according to the story. Also, if we think about the Kagyu, the forefather of Kagyu Gampopa, and his student Jepapmadrupa, and his disciples Dukun Chopa Singdun, Talong Tampa, and so forth, many Kagyu master forefathers practiced vegetarianism. And many of the students who practiced vegetarianism were called the ones who ate the teachings of the vegetarian stock. So a stock here, it's like you make a stock that you put in your soup, and so instead of using meat, they would use vegetarian stock. So whether you're eating, so basically saying that they're eating vegetarian soup or vegetarian food, and so that is speaking about them. Likewise, now if you think about the Karma Kansang tradition, as I've mentioned yesterday, from the time of the fourth Karmapa Ropa Dorje on, at the Karma Gachin until the time of the 10th Karmapa Chön Dorje, there was the strict rules against eating meat. Also in Kamsang monasteries, there was some degree of rules about meat, and particularly people who were vegetarian were considered very highly and praised. Now, even at later times, there was the modern master of the non-sectarian movement, Jamgon Köntal Lodatayan. There's a quotation from him that we can look at. I think it's beneficial to look at. One moment, please. So this is the citation from Jamgon Köntal Lodro Rinpoche. So what he says is the main points. He said that the people in the faithful people had to give him so many offerings that so they definitely had like a karmic debt because of this and a burden because of this, but because Jamgon Köntal Lodro was able to encounter the teachings of the great sage, and in particular the teaching of encountering the secret mantra Vajrayana, he said his root vows and Samye were unbroken, he thought, but it's quite possible that there are violations of secondary Samayas. But I've thought that it's important to do the methods of compassion and made confessions over and over again. And so, for this reason, I have the hope that I don't have any hope of being reborn in a pure land, he said, but I think it's possible that I could achieve a mere human body or two. And so I hope that at that time I may be reborn in a land that is where it is not necessary to eat meat. And so this is the aspiration that he made. And so I thought that there's also a lot of feeling in this citation too. There are many other such stories, but there's not a whole lot of time today. So there's no way that I can describe them, that I can go through them all. Now, as I mentioned before, during the time of the Buddha and the later, And during the time that the Buddha flourished in Vinaya, the Vinaya discipline was practiced well, and it was basically practiced exactly taught as in the Vinaya. They had all the situation, all of the facilities that they needed in order to do this. But these days, if we look at the way that monastics live these days, in the oldest, in the southern countries, the Theravada, it's been a long time in the northern countries that it's been a long time since we've gone for daily alms rounds. So these days in monasteries, they particularly make meals for the Sangha. And so they need to gather, keep many foodstuffs, and they also need to buy a lot of food. And as if a monastery were to buy a lot of meat at a single time, to order and buy a lot of meat for a single time to feed their Sangha, then it'd be difficult to say whether or not that is food that is pure in three ways. Because in the time of the Buddha, as I said before, you would go on an alms round, so whatever food you got, we were completely dependent on others, you had no control over it. So basically you ate whatever other people offered you, and you had no power of your own. But if you look at the way we live these days, we go to buy food particularly for the Sangha and buy the food for the Sangha. And when we order the food, then that's not under others' control, that's our freedom, right? It's our control that we order. So when we do that, it's a different situation. Likewise, if you order meat for the Sangha in a monastery and go to a butcher in a butchery, then it would be very difficult for it to be pure of the three. Pure in the three ways. For example, in our actual experience, in the past, if in a monastery the monks and nuns ate meat, then they would make one or two new butcher shops near that monastery. And then later, when the monks and nuns in the monastery stopped eating meat, then the butcher shops near the monasteries would close quickly. And this is something that we actually see, right? So the reason why the butcher shop was put there was because the monks and nuns in the monastery ate meat, and so they put the butcher shop there. And all the meat is thinking that would probably pry the animals and buy the meat, and whether he bought the meat or whether he slaughtered the animals, he would be thinking of the monastery to do that. And so if we think about that, if we think about the three ways of meat being pure, then there'd be real suspicions about that food. So later, when we see that, now if we went to the butchers and asked, were those animals slaughtered for our sake? Then they'd probably sit with their mouths, they'd say, oh, probably no. They would pretend to say no, because they need to submit to, oh, no, of course not. It's not for you. It's for everyone, they'd say. But inside of them, so what they'd be thinking? If we didn't slaughter animals, how do we get meat for you? Meat doesn't fall from the sky. Where do I get the food? They'd be laughing inside. Inside, they'd be laughing. But in their mouth, they'd be saying, oh, no, this is not for your sake, they'd say with their mouths. And so for that reason, the lifestyle of the monastics at the Buddhist time and our current monastic lifetime there's a huge change that's happened, and we need to understand this. We say meat that is pure in the three ways, but at that time there's been such a great change in the environment of the lifestyle that at our time, if we try to practice, it's difficult to say it really matches exactly what it should. So it's important for us to understand this. Likewise, People have said this to me. For example, when I was young, I really liked meat. When I was a little kid, we would slaughter animals once a year, and the butchers, we'd have Chinese who would come. They wouldn't join us. They weren't Han Chinese, but they're from Sala. They're from the Sala region. They're the Sala people, and they'd come and they'd slaughter the animals. It's actually the same if you killing yourself and having someone else making someone else kill are the same. But the feeling is that we always feel like it's better to have someone else do the killing, and so we'd have the other people do the killing. And when I was young, you'd see the sentient beings being suffocated and be sweating over their whole body. They didn't die immediately. It was really difficult. You'd have to see them. I'd cry, and I'd jump up and down, and I'd scream. And later, when they're about to butcher animals, they take me away and put me someplace else. And I remember this, and people tell me too, so I remember that myself. Still, after the sentient being was killed, when the meat was served in front of me, then if I'd eat it. Because of this place, I'd eat it. Because if there was no, I think that if I was young, when I was young, because of the local custom was to eat meat, if I hadn't eaten, the local custom was to eat meat, so I would eat it. And not only did I eat, I actually really liked it. When I was at Tsurpo Monastery, there was this Tsurpo's dry meat. It's really, really delicious. The governor of Lhasa really liked it too. He'd say, bring me the Tsurpo dry meat. Don't bring me anything else, he'd say. So it was pretty well known. It was really delicious, and I really liked it. And then when I got to India, and he said, there's not a whole, if you compare it to the Tibetan meat, Indian meat just doesn't have much flavor. It doesn't really have any flavor. When I was in Tibet, I never eat goat. But when I got to India, then I was served goat a few times, and it's just I don't need to really speak about it much. But then also I saw some movies about how animals are slaughtered. When I saw them, I thought, no, there's no way now. It's no okay to eat meat. Just no way I can eat meat, I thought. And I decided to give up meat. And that's when I began. Some people say from that time, was that my giving up meat was because of the influence of Haitao Fa Shi. But whoever it was, and it doesn't matter who it was, it doesn't matter. I think it's very good. There's nothing bad about it. It's good, in fact. But the actual fact, the real reason why I gave up meat, when I saw how sentient beings are slaughtered in the video, what I thought at that time was that I haven't taken birth in a body where I need to take sentient beings in this life in this lifetime, but it's not impossible that that happen to me in next lifetime. So from now on, so I need to make an aspiration never to be reborn in a body where I need to take other sentient beings' lives, and I need to have that impetus. And so I had that resolve, and at that time I wrote a verse, and this verse goes, I've forgotten the verse now. Oh, this is it. If we think about the sufferings of sentient beings under the sky, then think about their suffering, then there's no way I want to separate them from my life, and I need to give up eating meat. So from that time began giving up meat. But other people, I didn't have much plan to really encourage people to be vegetarianism or eat meat. And then at one time, the Kagyu Munlam, I thought it'd be, some people said to me it would be good to speak about this during the Kagyu Munlam, and encourage people. But if I encouraged it, I thought that the best is that people would think for themselves and give up of their own volition, as opposed to someone telling them to do that. I thought there's no point to that. It'd be ridiculous. So I didn't have any plans to that. But from 2004, on the last day of the Kagyu Munlam 2004, there was a vegetarian group in Bodh Gaya, and they said, please, you should speak about it. And so I didn't plan to speak about it initially, but people requested me to. And so for that day, I spoke about the importance of being vegetarianism. And I said, if the best, make the aspiration or the resolve to give up eating meat for your entire life, or to give it up. The middle is to give up every week, or if the least is give up once a month or something. So, and I said that it's important for us to give some interest to give up eating meat, as you all know. But at that time, because of me saying this at that time, many people, I didn't think many people would support me in this, but as I looked up, and we were having now at that time we were at the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya, and I couldn't see everyone, but if I looked at it, and so when I said this, then I looked around and I said, at least half the people were raising their hands, and I said, well, those of you who want to give up meat for the rest of your life, then raise your hand. And I looked around, and half the people there gave it up, and I was just surprised that there are so many people who did this. And then so many people said that even later, there's some people who said that there's some people said to me it'd be good for me meat because if you don't eat meat, your body will get unhealthy. You grew up in an environment where you ate meat, and so for that reason, it would be good to eat meat. And other people would say to me that I'm the karma bun. So from the karma, then you'll make a connection with all those sentient beings, and then you'll be able to guide all of the sentient beings to Sakhavati, or to a good rebirth, they would say. There are people who did say this, but I know whether I'm able to guide anyone. I can't even bring myself to Puram. How can I bring anyone else there? So forget about bringing anyone. So for that reason, I kind of insisted, and until now, and that's probably been at least 10 years, and the most experience I have about that is that the biggest difference between when I was eating, the time when I ate meat, and now is that when I was eating meat, it helps me have more compassion for the sentient beings, more empathy for other sentient beings, and for feeling for the suffering of the sentient beings. When you're eating meat, you don't really think about how it affects the other sentient beings. You just don't really think about it. But now, once you've given up eating meat, and you see the flesh of an animal that's been killed, then you immediately feel uncomfortable, and you actually begin to think about it. And so I think that is definitely a big difference. Still, but in Tibetan there is a saying. Saying the compassionate eat meat, those who can with Samye eat alcohol. And so what they're saying is there is a compassion that you're going to. They said that that sentient beings are going to be killed, and once you've eaten, then if you go there, if you recite the names of the Buddhas, recite the mantras of the Buddha, make aspirations for them, and then if you eat that meat, then that benefits those sentient beings, they say. Likewise, when you're eating meat, if you recite mantras at that time, and if you recite the names of the Buddhas, there are texts that describe how to do this. However, if you actually really think about it, there's a quote from Drupa Kunla, which I think is really quite true. And what he said is that You say that if meat is compassionate, but the best thing is not to eat it. Because if the compassionate eat meat, it's really difficult to eat meat compassionately. And so he just said a story. So I'm going to tell you the story. And the story is that Drupal Kunle went to this region. And there's a great drought, and the crops were not growing, and there was a great famine, and people didn't have anything else. No one had anything to eat. It was a very difficult time. And at that time, there was one family, and in that family there were the two parents and then the son, and the three of them had a really difficult time. They had nothing to eat, and because they had nothing to eat, then the parents thought to themselves, we've grown old. If one of us dies, then if our child eats our meat, then the child can live for a little bit longer. What the child was thinking is like there's no way I can think of my parents dying. So instead, if I die and then they eat my body, then I think it's good. That's what he thought. And to the end, what happened? So the child, he decided, and he committed suicide. So he killed himself. But he left a note. The reason why I'm dying is so that the two of you do not die of hunger, and so you must eat my meat. And if you don't eat my meat, then there's no point to me dying. So the parents had no choice but to eat his meat. If you don't eat the son's meat, then the son died for their sake. So they had no choice but when you ate it, was there any flavor to it? Did it taste good? No, how could there be? They had to eat it as they're crying. So they're eating and crying at the same time. And so that's the way the compassionate people should eat should eat meat. In the Mahayana, there's no sentient being that's not your mother. So you need to think of all sentient beings as your parent, as your mother and father, and think of them as that way. And if you love them as your parents and parents, and so you wouldn't eat your mother and father's session unless it just came to the very end. Even at that time, you probably wouldn't eat it. No matter how desperate you were, you wouldn't eat their situation. If you have to eat it, it should be like that. It should be like that situation. It should be like a situation. Find that there's no choice but to eat. And if you eat at that time, how could there be any taste to it? You should eat it as tears flow down, shed down your cheeks. We say we're eating compassion as we eat it, but where's our compassion? We just, recite a short prayer at the beginning, then we immediately start wolfing down the food. It's like we don't have enough time to really make this, and we rush we have no hesitation about bringing the food to our mouth with no feeling. We're just eating. We have no restraint at all. And so, and to say that eating food like that is just words. But in actuality, it's difficult to really be that. And some people say this. Some people think so that if you eat meat, that you have no compassion. But there's no. That's not certain necessarily so. There are many great beings who eat meat. And if you say that they have no compassion, you can't say that, right? But generally, if we should take the great sentient beings as an example. We say the great beings do this so we can do it, but the acts of great beings are different than ours. We can't know what qualities of abandonment and realization, what their qualities in their being are. If we haven't got to the level that they're at, so if we act as if we're taking them as an example, it just wouldn't work out the same way. And so for that reason, it is important to take this into account. If we say that the compassionate eat meat, it's the nice words, but you have to think about how would you actually mean it. It's not really easy to feel compassion and then eat meat. You wouldn't do it unless you had no choice. It's really difficult otherwise if it has not a desperate situation. In any case, you don't need a lot of scriptures and real and logic to give up meat, but you don't really need that scripture and logic. Generally, if you're a meat, even an ordinary person, just an ordinary person who doesn't practice Dharma, think about they'd have good reasons to practice it. If you don't need all those, there's no need to give them quotations about the Buddhas or the people or the great masters of the past. It's easy for them. If just your ordinary people who don't practice Dharma, they think, well, they'll do it. If we're going to a restaurant, right? If you need to go to the bathroom, for example, if you go to the bathroom, do you need scriptures and realization to prove to you that you need to go to the bathroom? You don't. When you get to the time when you have to go, then immediately your body tells you. Your body's saying, go, go, go. And if you don't go at that time, then it's difficult, right? It's the same thing. If you think well, if an ordinary person really thinks about it, they'll understand the reasons why you should practice vegetarianism. If you look on YouTube, there are videos of young children who are like 4 and 5 years old. If they understand that you have to kill sentient beings in order to kill animals in order to get meat, then they won't eat it, right? Children at the age of 4 and 5 know it. They can even think about it. Most children, if you put many children don't really know that meat comes from killing animals. For these days, meat comes from a supermarket these days. It comes up, it's wrapped in plastic. It's displayed nicely in a cellophane wrap. And if you look at this and you think that it probably just comes out of that they don't really understand that it comes from killing a sentient being. So the children don't know. If the children know, if you bring a child and bring a chicken in front of the child and say if we kill it and say, now are you going to eat it? Most of them wouldn't eat it, right? They say it's really beautiful. It's a really nice chicken. I'm not going to hurt it. I'm not going to eat it. It'd be hard to find any who'd say that they would eat it. And so for that reason, we don't need a lot of quotations and logic. If we need to use logic and quotations in order to prove to us that we need to do something that ordinary people can understand than us, then it's actually a bit of a disgrace. No, I think that there are actually two types of people who don't eat meat. One is those who don't eat it for their own sake, those who don't eat it for others. Those who don't eat it for their own sake are people who don't eat it for their health, or because of tradition, and being used to the tradition. Now, those who do it for others' sake, or those who think about the suffering of animals or think about environmental protection and don't eat it, and they don't eat meat for those reasons. So these are the reasons why people don't eat meat, right? Now, generally, if we think about people in the world, in terms of the world overall, the Buddha and Buddhism, many people think when you say Buddha or Buddhism, they understand this as being like a symbol of loving kindness, compassion, and peace. When you say Buddhist, they don't immediately think about emptiness and selflessness. There are very few who actually understand that. Basically, when you say Buddhist, then people say, oh, they teach love, they teach kindness, non-violence, they like peace. And so that's the feeling that most people have. And so, because that's the image that most people have of Buddhists, their understanding of Buddhism, if while they still have that, we, without any resist, eat meat and drink blood, then people are going to wonder, well, what's going on? And so for this reason, I think it's important to know what other people's opinions are first. We shouldn't think about only our own habits and our own thoughts. We can't totally disregard other people's ways of thinking and their habits, particularly in the Mahayana. We want to free all sentient beings from suffering and bring them to happiness. And this is the primary work of the Mahayana. Even in our aspirations, we say, may all sentient beings be happy and be free of and have the causes happy. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And so we say this, and at the same time, on the other hand, in order to, if we are harming so many sentient beings for our food, then it's basically, it's contradictory of the aspiration we're always making. And so that's something that we really need to think about it. Whether we're eating meat or not is not like understanding emptiness or understanding selfless. It's not something that's so complicated or profound. If you think about it, it's very easy to understand. We can easily understand it. And it's easy for anyone to understand it. If we look in the Vinaya, and so that the meat that's pure in the three ways, we have to say the particular reason why it's pure in the three ways. There's a reason why it's said about meat, but not about rice. And the reason for that is that because of meat, there's a danger of harming many sentient beings. And for that reason, we have to examine whether it is pure in the three ways or not. And because of that, a piece of meat and a cup of rice are very different situations. And if in terms of the Vinaya, this is something that we need to consider carefully. Still, what we do is, though, we think, I didn't kill it myself, and I didn't have anyone kill it for my sake, and so there's it's not a big deal, we think. But I wonder, is that really like that? Because these days, the way we live on this world has changed in terms of, and it's gone into the livestock farming and animal husbandry. And so there would be as many butchers and meat sellers as there are people who eat, and as people who eat meat. And so there's a great actual influence on the number of people who eat meat as there are meat. So it's not just a question of not doing misdeeds ourselves. We also, for the sake of other sentient beings who commit misdeeds, we need to think about them too. We need to think about what can we do for them is something we need to consider. So next what I'd like to speak about is actually that in this world, on this earth, how many sentient beings, I think how much, and because of killing or eating those sentient beings, what effect does that have on this earth? And so I thought I'd like to introduce this to you in brief. Can you all hear me, right? There's Oxford University in Great Britain, which has a website that summarizes our world in data. What this teaches us is that from 1968 until 2018, over 50 years, the world production of livestock tripled throughout the entire world. So it tripled. And so for that reason, during the single year of 2018, for livestock production, the amount of livestock production, that is the meat that was produced through livestock farming, the number is the amount of meat from there are tons, right? So a ton is 1,000 kilos, right? So of 1 ton, for every tons, there are 340 million tons of meat produced, and this includes 69 billion chickens. 69 billion chickens in 1 year. 1.5 billion pigs. So a billion is like 1,000 million, right? So it's 1.5 billion. 574 million sheep. 479 million goats. 302 million cattle. So that's what it includes in that number. So if we total them all, if we explain it from another way, if we talk about it in a different way, if we just think about the single year of 2018, if we don't think about seafood, if we only talk about livestock, the number of animals slaughtered was 10 times greater than the total human population of the world. And the total 10 times more than the entire human population of the world was killed, or animals was killed. Now these numbers are too huge, and so we can't understand them. So if we want to calculate how many were killed in a single day, so how many animals are killed in a single day, we can look at that. So over the entire world on a single day, the minimum 190 million chickens are slaughtered. 190 million chickens are slaughtered. And on a single day, at a minimum, 4.1 million pigs are slaughtered every day. And in a single day, 1.57 million sheep are slaughtered every day. And among the sheep, most of them are killed before they're they're lambs. They're killed before they're a year old. And some of them are killed before they even reach 2 months old. So many lambs are slaughtered. Every day, the minimum in the entire world we have goats, right? 1.3 million goats are slaughtered every day. So goats mainly are raised for milk production. And so they're raised for milk. And so if a billy goat has died, if there's a male kid that doesn't have any meat, and so they're immediately sent to the slaughterhouse and killed. Likewise, and every day, and there's 1 million cows or 1 million cattle are slaughtered every day. And so in this way, if we think about that, there's a place called Cowspiracy. Now I can't pronounce that well, but there's a cowspiracy.com website. And what it says is that every day, in every hour of every day, 6 million animals are slaughtered for human consumption every year. Every year, 6 million animals. Every hour, 6 million animals are slaughtered for human consumption. This is just really scary to think about. You can't even count that much. Now, that is just livestock. Now, if you count this is not counting seafood and fish. And the reason for that is it's difficult to count each individual fish. It's hard to count the totals. Even if you can't count it's difficult to count the exact number, but generally, every day, there are probably 3 billion fish. 3 billion fish are killed every day. So the fish is a billion is like 1,000 millions, right? So this is like 3,000 million fish. So every day, So basically, pretty much 3 billion fish are killed, but there's probably actual numbers killed is hard than that. And the reason for that is that when you're catching fish, the same time as you're catching the fish, you're fishing for a particular species of fish, but many other types of fish also get caught. And when those are caught, the other caught that are caught, and also other marine species that are not meat. There are many small of these, and many of these are also caught at the same time. When they're caught, then there's no use for them, and they're just thrown. Some are wounded in the process, and then they get sick, and in the end they die. There's just no use for them. They're thrown over, and so there's no point to their dying. There's the World Economic Forum, and it says that in 2016, the total world production of seafood was, they say, there were 155 million tons of seafood production. So if you think about all the sentient beings, the millions of sentient beings were killed every day. And if it's decide if they were killed, if there was like a use to it, and if they actually eat the humans actually eat that food, are we actually able to eat it? And are they eaten? They aren't. In actual fact, many of the animals die meaninglessly. They're slaughtered, but they don't get to our plates, and they die without any meaning. For example, according to the UN Food and according to the Food and Agriculture Organization 2015 annual report, so the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's 2015 annual report, 1/3 of the total world food production is spoiled or wasted. So basically, 1/3 of it is just wasted. If you have 3 parts, if you have that a third of the world production is just wasted, and what includes that? And so that is like concluding meat as a fifth of all the meat. For example, there's like if you have 100, it's like 20% of all meat is wasted. Another way to think about it is if you're thinking about killing 7 billion animals, then if 700 million animals are slaughtered, then 14 million are pointlessly wasted. And particularly the seafood, they're all the seafood and all those, and the proportion of them, it's very easy for them to go bad, and so the percentage for them is much higher. It's a much higher proportion than of the livestock that goes bad. So if you think about seafood, every year, 35% of each ton of seafood caught is wasted. It goes bad. And so they did this just base summary of how many animals are slaughtered every year. Now, with those animals, how are the animals raised before they're slaughtered? How are they cared for? When they're killed, how are they slaughtered? If we actually have to talk about this is just a really terrifying situation. Just thinking about it's like you'd be terrified. It's like the hells in the animal. It's like this is the suffering that I experience in the hells are the animals are experiencing the same sufferings that we say are experienced in the hells. There's no difference. It's like we can't even describe it. We can't even dare talk about it. Basically, we think that all the livestock we are keeping, as long as they're living, they're kept given a corral they can stay. They have a feed that they're given. They can go where they want. Like, for example, in Tibet. When you keep livestock in Tibet, as long as they're alive, they've got a bit of freedom. It's kind of nice for them. If you ask, is life how it is? That's not how it is for them. Most animals, the way they're raised and the way they're slaughtered, if we were actually to see it with our own eyes, I think from that time we wouldn't dare to eat meat, or the meat would have no flavor. It definitely would happen, I think, because we generally don't see it. We don't see how the sentient beings are slaughtered. We don't see what happens to how they're raised with our eyes. For the one thing, it's good, because if we saw them from that point, we wouldn't dare to eat meat. We'd all become people who had no taste for meat anymore. Likewise, there are many animals that are raised in this world for our food, right? And this livestock production has a really strong, it causes a lot of environmental destruction. This is something we also need to think about. This is really important. It's not just the slaughtering animals. It's not just but what destruction are we causing to the environment because of raising those animals? For example, to give an example, in the entire world, in order to raise livestock, in a single year, how much water is used? It is 345 trillion liters of water are used for livestock production around the world. And we say 35 trillion liters. And so this is like these Tibetan numbers here. They're difficult to count in the Tibetan numbers. It's easier to just say trillion in English. 345 trillion liters of water are used. The drinking water for the human population for a single year is just 8.6 trillion liters, but the water drunk by the animals 345 trillion liters. So the amount of water used for livestock production would provide for the human population drinking water for the human population for 40 years. If humans were to drink the water that the animals are given, it would last us for 40 years. Like we have a pound, right? A pound is like a unit of weight, right? If you have a pound of beef, to produce that beef requires, how much water does that require? It requires 11,000 liters of water to produce 1 pound of beef. So if you have the hamburgers, right? You see those. In order to make enough meat, have enough beef for a hamburger patty, in order to make a patty of beef, you need 3,550 liters of water to produce that. And if you take a person could take a shower every day for half a year. And that would use the same amount of water as is needed to make a single patty of a hamburger. The amount of water to make the hamburger patty and the amount of water to take for a person to shower daily for half a year, it's the same amount of water. Also in our world, we have the clean drinking water. There's the ocean. The oceans are huge, but we can't drink ocean water because it's salt water, right? So the potable water, the drinkable water, there's not a lot of it is clean. And all that clean water, a third of that drinkable water, if you divide all the water to 3 parts, is used for livestock production. So the amount of water that we humans on the earth drink is 25.6 billion liters of water. But the water drunk by all the cattle kept in earth is 250 billion liters of water, just for animals. Thus, the amount of water drunk by cattle is more than 9 times the amount of the total amount drunk by humans, and so for that reason. So a lot of water is used to raise livestock, and that's important for us to know. Likewise, if we were to weigh all the food that we sent all of the humans on Earth to eat, it would be 9.5 billion kilos of food. But the amount of food that cattle alone on Earth is 61 billion kilos of animal feed. So it's over 6 times more food than is eaten by humans. And so there's a huge amount of usage of water. Also, if you think about land usage, over half of the Earth's land surface is used to raise livestock. And it's if we think about the use of land, think about the depletion of the oceans, water pollution, destruction of biodiversity, the main cause of all of these, main cause of most strongest influence is livestock production. And so we can see this and understand that. Similarly, there's also the waste. There's a lot that is wasted from producing animals. For example, if there's a feedlot with 2,500 cattle produces as much waste as a city with population of 410, more waste than a city with a population of 410,000 people. There's all the waste of that type of city with 410,000. And the same amount as waste as comes from a feedlot with 2,500 cattle. For example, in the amount of waste from livestock is 130 times as much as the waste produced by humans. So in America alone, if we just weighed the amount of waste produced by livestock, it is probably in America alone is just 5,600 kilos per minute, in every minute. If we were to weigh that in terms of cars, right? It would be the same weight as 35 cars. That's what they say. Likewise, if you think about the oceans, it's similar. With there's a lot, so there's a lot of because of taking there's a lot of environmental discussion. There's discussion to the oceans, discussion to the environment, and in particular, if one thing we need to think about is that in the Earth, there are many children in the world who do not have enough food. There are malnourished, undernourished children. And the countries where they live, what they do is they use most of the food for the sake of animals. It's fed to animals. It's not given to people. So you have the starving children, and they're not given food, and it's given to animals instead. And the ones given to the animals, what is it that the animals are used for? They're sent off to the rich Western countries. The food is not given to the people, but it's given to the livestock. And in particular, the world, if you look at the data from the world environmental organizations, you think that the greenhouses we have the greenhouse gases around the world, right? And so there's a lot of, because of these gases, this causes global warming. And 18% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from animal agriculture and livestock. And so the greenhouse gases produced by livestock production is more than is produced by all the cars, airplanes, trucks, trains, boats, and all of their forms of transportation. Then the amount of So the greenhouse gas produced by livestock production is greater than the amount produced by all the transportation in the world. And so it's a lot of environmental destruction that's being caused by livestock production. And so if we think about it for many different reasons, there are many reasons to give up meat and be a vegetarian. Whether or not you have faith in Dharma, if you look at the actual situation in the world, there's a lot to think about. It's very clear. However, when you actually come to put it into practice, and we give up meat and practice vegetarian, you have to have a limit. You have to be very skillful about it, because you have to look at your own physical health. It's important to do it in a way that matches your health. Likewise, as I've said before, to give up meat and be vegetarian should be something that you decide for yourself and that you want to do yourself. It shouldn't. If you think to yourself, the Buddha said to do this, I'm going to be a vegetarian. It shouldn't be like that. You should see the reasons for yourself. Decide for yourself. And if you give up meat and practice vegetarianism that way, it's good. Instead, if you just follow it as a tradition, or you say the guru says to do it, so I'm going to give up meat. I don't really, but even though you don't really want to, then there's no point in doing that. There's not a whole lot of reason for that. In order for there's a real purpose and a real good reason to do it, then you need to decide that you want to do it for yourself. And that you should make your own, that you should see it for yourself and recognize yourself. A lot of people are really attached to the taste of meat, and because of that they're not able to give up meat. That's the real crux of the matter. People are attached to the taste of meat. Meat tastes good, so they think, I can't give up meat at all. There are a lot of people think like that. Not being able to give meat because of the taste if you're attached to it, whether you're talking about in terms of Vinaya or whether you're talking about the Maya, that's something, Mahayana, that's something that you need to give up. And the reason for that is because it is attachment. Is when you're attached and craving something. And so in Vinaya is primarily about giving up desires and attachments. And in the Mahayana, there's a danger, according to the Mahayana, there's the danger of harming sentient being out of your attachment to the taste of flesh, and so it is also prohibited in the Mahayana. And so as I think when there are many people who try to prove that we are able to eat meat, I think it's because they're attached to the taste of meat and they don't want to give it up, and so they're disputing it for that reason. But you can't just say that it's because I'm saying that. You have to look at yourself. I think you have to look at it. You have to look at the reason. You have to think for yourself. Why am I unable to give up meat? And understand your own reasons for not giving meat. And be honest with yourself about it. Generally, giving up eating meat is good. But whether you're able to give up meat depends upon your health and your environment and so forth. You have to do that in accordance with your situation. It's not something you can just do right away. And also, if you give up meat and then get attached to that and think you're really great for that, that's no point in that. Because if we give up, because giving up meat in order to helps other sentient beings and protect other sentient beings is something we should do. It's just not something that we should be conceited about. There's no reason why we should feel pride about doing something that we should just do anyways. And so if we give up meat or stuff and then we talk down to people who haven't given up meat or disparage them, then that's not good. Doing that is not good at all. So as I said before, there's a danger of it turning into the austerities of Devadatta. The Devadatta wanted to diminish the Buddha, and he had competitiveness of the Buddha. So he had a mistaken motivation for that reason. Devadatta's actions were not correct. That is why. And so if we also have wrong motivation, then it wouldn't be wrong to say that we're doing the same thing as Devadatta. You know, also there are people who can't give up meat, and if you're not able to give up meat, there's something that people you have to speak about that, because some people, if there are people who, if they don't eat meat, they get sick. So I've missed a bit of what His Holiness said for technical reasons. But he's saying that basically there are people who get into fights. And so if you get into fights, then this doesn't help the people who've given up meat, it doesn't help the people who haven't given up meat. And particularly in Tibet there, if we have conflict like that in Tibet, then it really will seem strange to people who see it. There's a danger that it'll seem very bad, and for these reasons, we shouldn't think about only about the way we see things, the way we think about things. We also need to think about how other people see things and how they think about it. You need to look at others and also look at yourself. You need to look at both. It's like when you need to look at others because you need a mirror to see yourself. With the eye of prajna, you need to look at yourself. But in order to look at yourself with your eye of prajna, you need to have your physical eyes to look at others. And so this is something we all have to keep in mind. And so here, that is enough about the talk about this topic of vegetarianism and the realization topic of the Great Encampment. Now, there's so much to say, but because of the lack of time and the not lack of time to prepare, that's all I can say. Now, tomorrow we have one day tomorrow, then we have a day off, and then we have one more day of teaching, and then we will do the Guru Yoga. And I still haven't decided which Guru Yoga we're going to practice. And so I need to think about that. Okay, that is enough.